Yeah. Okay, so I've been reading SOA, and two things came to me. One is not at all in SOA, but
service-oriented architecture, or what?
What?
What have you been reading?
James SOA.
James
SOA. I've put a link in the
SOWA.
Yes. He's an old hand in the field. Very brilliant person. He's been working a lot on concept graphs, which has been one of my key inspirations, but I realized I didn't dig deep enough into it. One thing that came to me, not directly from SOA, but did up to a point, is realizing that claims and arguments are similar in some way. Because in a claim, in some versions of traditional linguistic, there's something called the theme and the rheme. Does that ring a bell to anybody? The notion that if I say the table is blue, basic claim, the table is the theme, it's kind of already established. And the is blue is what I'm saying new about it, the further element. And that's the rheme, R-H-E-M-E. So the notion that there is kind of an already agreed upon topic, and then there's the new information in the sentence. Whereas if I ask, what is blue? The table is blue. Then the table would be the rheme and the blue would be the theme. it's contextual. And this is what arguments are, right? It's the premise conclusion scheme. The premises are the theme and the conclusion is the rheme. It's the new element. So there's a common deep structure there. Yep. That I think we should exploit. So that's the first intuition I've been starting to work on. The second intuition, and that is more directly SOA. SOA says, there's kind of three functions for the verb to be, which is, something exists, something is identical to something else, and something is some quality. Basically, this predicate applies to something. So,
is it specifically English?
No, that's actually in other languages, you will find those distinguished. Like there are.
In Spanish, you have two forms of to be.
Yeah, and Tibetan has.
And Portuguese too, yeah.
Yeah. Ser estar. Yes, English confuses them, but he's actually claiming that in his one of his notations, he says, they're actually similar. They're actually the same. I mean, we can distinguish them, but when we make a predicate about something, one way to interpret the predicate, which is, you can take many operators as basic and construct other operators in terms of them. But one way to do this is to take as operator basic the fact that any predicate. So if I say something is blue, well, the something need to exist. And so the notion is that when you assemble predicate, you do some variable unifications. So that's the equality part. When you have, there's an existential implicit in the predicate. Even with the if have impact, but then he basically has this model where you have the negate, the counterfactual parts of the sentence. So you have anything that is in the kind of default mode is and anything that is in the counterfactual bubble, if you will. Oh God, I'm getting a call. 1 second, I'll take that.
I would say that based on the points that Marc-Antoine has made, there's Felix's proposed requirement seems kind of appropriate. It's the one where an argument supporting a conclusion is equivalent to a claim. Might be an interesting point of continuation there. But go ahead and finish what you were saying, Marc-Antoine.
Yeah, and sorry about that. It was a pocket call after all. Yeah, okay, so in the counterfactual, you can use it for negation, but you can also use it for hypothesis, because then he's got nested truth domain, and then the consequent is in the nested truth domain. Anyway, that's worth reading. That's not the point, but the idea that existential and equality, they can all be unified is, I find interesting, but I'm still puzzling out this one. Certainly it's clear for me that variable unification on predicates is something I want in the model, because a lot hangs on that, and a lot of confusion also hang on improper unification. Is the term used here the same as this one? Is a non-trivial operator. So tentative unification, non-tentative unification.
But isn't it an impossible operator if it's not formalized? Because you always say there's multiple interpretations. So if it's not formalized, you can't unify, right? You can only.
I think we have to have the notion of tentative unification. Unified until proven otherwise. The notion that things are, I don't believe things are clearly ever true or false or established. It's okay, tentative, established, and then let's see where it leads us.
And then linguistically, simply because they share the same word or something like that.
Yeah. So anyway, that's something I'm clearly variable unification is important. I don't think that's avoidable. How to do it is something we'll discuss. But when we have multiple predicates or multiple entities or multiple claims, I mean, how do we unify is important. Or multiple, you know, we spoke of variable claims. It's the same. Are we speaking about the same variable? And can we have overlap? Can we have all this and all that? When you have two different concepts using the same name, is there an overlap where the assertion is meaningful? Anyway, so that I'm still working on. Hi, Bentley.
Bentley.
But the one I really wanted to introduce here is the equivalence, or at least the common point between claim and argument.
But didn't we already, like a long time ago, that agree that arguments are claims? I mean, even in the current model, it is modeled as such.
That's absolutely true, but it goes deeper than this, right?
Okay.
The theme rheme makes a kind of premise conclusion structure in the claim itself. So the premise conclusion is the claim is saying something that has these properties or is identified by design as this entity, also has this conclusion, also has this predicate applying to it, conclusion. So the claim already has a premise conclusion structure, which we only put in the subclass, and now I'm saying let's.
Yeah, you mean no? What you mean to say is that a simple claim, which we right now don't model as an argument, also has a theme and rheme structure, and theme and rheme is a generalization of.
Yes.
Yeah.
Premise conclusion. That's what I'm saying. Yes.
Okay.
So you could say that you could optionally like model theme and rheme within a basic claim class, and then specifically in the case of an argument, I have to see the model in front of me. Then the premise would be the theme and the
correct.
Yeah. Which would then allow you to treat all themes the same across the model, which might support some use cases. I'd have to think what those are, but it seems likely. Yeah, I think I get that.
Yeah. By the way, the theme is marked in certain languages like Japanese and Tibetan. There's a linguistic marker for the theme. So it's not uncommon to have that as a.
It actually boils down a bit to arguing definitions as well, because it would be arguing the themes in this case. Like you assume that the theme is accepted, but if you don't, then, and if the theme is within a claim, you're going to basically argue against definitions or against accepted criteria, which are defined within the claim.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's some useful abstraction there potentially. I'll read it. Is this the?
Yeah, I put the SOA.
Okay.
Theme and rheme I didn't get from SOA.
Oh.
It made me think, it evoked theme and rheme somehow, which is something I remembered from elsewhere. I just Wikipedia'd it afterwards and spent some time on reviewing my Tibetan grammar, because it's where I had seen linguistic markers for it. But Japanese is a clearer example than Tibetan, frankly. It's the wa particle in Tibetan, and in Japanese, and it's ni in Tibetan. Okay.
Yeah, so the tough part is coming up with the concrete examples that necessitate that. I think, I see it a lot more in when we start getting into disambiguation, because disambiguation is going to be strongly tied to not really sentence structure, but exactly
Claim
what you're
structure.
talking about.
Yeah.
The more abstract structure of the claim. So yeah, but that being said, we have Felix's proposed case, which might be interesting to discuss along these lines, which was, if you look at where's the
let me share screen. This one, yes, there you go.
There you go. Yeah, A supports B is equivalent to C on line 42 there. Yeah.
Yes.
Which raises a lot of questions about sentence generation and so on.
Right. Well, and sentence generation and a lot of other things, which is like, for example, it brings up the question of, are relevance and truth the same type of attribute, the same type of scoring or value, or
well, or in my case, atomicity. I don't allow adding claims that are X supports Y. Through curation, I don't allow it. So my claims need to be atomic in a way. So if anyone would ever add a claim like that, I curate it away, and that's one way of doing it. But you could also indeed argue, well, we want to have claims that have that text, and then indeed we want them all equivalence to a more formalized form, which is a valid point.
Okay, let's break this up. First, is everybody clear on the example? I haven't heard from Bentley, and I read it ahead of time, so I don't know if everybody understands the example here.
I have no comments.
Okay.
Just observing.
Okay. So yeah, so we have a couple questions that this brings up on the table. Modeling, I think, is the clearest of all, because I think we all agree that under the current models, an argument is a type of claim, right? It's essentially a subtype of claim, and therefore equivalence between claims is supported. So yes, it's possible to declare an argument and a claim to be equivalent.
But it's interesting. It's interesting. It looks entirely different in both models, though.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm not exactly sure how to do it in Stephen's model. It's clear to me how to do it in Tim's model, but it's less clear to me how.
It isn't.
No.
You have the positive sentence and the negative sentence is simply on the base claim. So it simply means that when you instantiate a support instance, you simply by default add premise, support, conclusion as a sentence if it's not in the set yet.
Okay, so what you're saying is, one second, just checking. What you're saying is the equivalence between the C and the A supports B will be only because they have the same sentence.
Yeah, but that's the model. That's also how all equivalence is modeled in that model so far.
Okay, fair enough.
So you would simply add both sentences in positive sentences, basically. But that's what you would do.
Yeah, what is missing from here is there is no equivalence class.
Yeah, but that's not missing.
By having a list, right? We
there
already went over this last time. When he says essentially, there's no step where you mark two claims as equivalent. Instead, the moment that happens, they're merged into one thing. That
is a step. Just like you draw, that is a step. It's just materialized differently. That's the fact that they're different models. It's just a different step.
Oh, okay. So there would be a single support instance. There would not be two. There would not be. Okay.
correct.
Fair enough. Okay, no, I did not get that. Fair, that works.
Okay. Okay, so that's the modeling part of this. Another question is, of course, as Stephen pointed out, would we allow a claim of this structure? And you know, when you say, Stephen, that you don't allow it through curation, I think what you, like in this case, what you're saying is you actually allow it, but the curation, what it would do is take the pure claim one that doesn't support or oppose anything and take its sentence and collapse it into the
exactly. Let me clarify. I wasn't arguing against supporting it. I was arguing, I was explaining that I chose not to support it, and primarily for simplicity reasons, because that wasn't my goal. I wasn't creating a perfect model. I think there's a lot of benefit in actually modeling it.
So what would you do in the case that, what would you do in the case that somebody created a standalone claim out of the blue that just said the table is made of wood because it's brown? Would you leave that as a standalone claim, or would you break that up into two claims and a support?
It would be converted into a support instance rather than a claim instance.
But in order to convert it into a support instance, you would need to create a total of 3 claims, right? Or rather 2 claims and a support, which would be the table is made of wood, the table is brown, and the table is made of wood because it is brown.
Exactly.
That's progressive formalization, makes a lot of sense to me. The question, of course, is what happens if people disagree about the interpretation, and then you.
Then that's process. That's what we're not going into right now.
That's not.
It's forget the word process. That is that is debate about. It is meta model. It's debate about model structure.
No, but I mean,
something we were doing
usual,
later.
Okay, what again and again and again. Anything that is processed can be argument. Everything is two-faced. Everything
accepted and will be done later.
No, it's
yes.
Then okay, sure, fine. Then everything can be done later, because everything that is in the core can also be processed. So if you say everything that can be processed has to be done later, then
no,
everything.
I said no. I'm saying that debate about debate structure will be done later. And I agree, it's argumentation. It will be done later.
I don't see the difference.
Okay,
I don't see the difference between.
As a dictator, I see the difference, or I claim to see a difference, and I arbitrarily move things to later according to my perspective.
Arbitrarily, okay, fair enough.
And Marc-Antoine, if you do want to include it in this discussion, it's not this one. Then you need to add a new example that is exactly that. Like add an example of a meta argument.
We have that. We have those, and we have pushed them off to later
in the table.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah. No. I mean, add it to this one again.
No. Okay. What is the second table is arguing about it as a process versus an argument about it as core, which is different.
We would rename it to postponed for a reason, because it's more than just process. It's a lot of stuff that's postponed right now because it's not the small enough step, or other reasons.
Correct. Okay, so back to the subject here. We understand Stephen's proposal for given the model how he
Yeah.
would handle that situation. How would it be handled in the other model? Would it be a standalone claim that is marked as equivalent to an argument? I guess that would be it. It introduces some interesting considerations, which is, how does the system work when a claim is equivalent to an argument? It implies that the standalone claim now has a conclusion and a premise, right? So it would be implied to it is essentially have to inherit it or access it through the equivalent argument.
Good question, yeah.
Well, you can, right? You can traverse the equivalence to the argument and then get the premise and the conclusion from the argument. So I think it's fine.
Right.
I think the model works.
Which would lead to some of the kinds of statements we have here, which is the one thing equivalent to others is therefore the negation of all that sort of thing. That would imply a claim that is equivalent to an argument. Uses has access to or requires or whatever the conclusion and premise of the other argument or
I think it's a similar process. I think the more interesting case, again, like last time as well, is how does generating sentences work, or where the sentence is stored and how is that resolved, I think is a more
very important
case.
The whole equivalence
thing.
I
mean, you would have the standalone claim would have a sentence, right? Because you don't create a standalone claim without a sentence. And then it would be the same thing as having the list of sentences, of positive sentences, right? It would use its, but it could also access, and vice versa, the sentence of the argument, which could be auto-generated, right? But like, I don't see it complicating the question of sentences.
Sentences are one aspect, but I must say the idea that we'll access the premise and conclusion via the equivalent argument. It's like you have to know that one of the equivalent is an argument, so you have to traverse all the equivalences.
Well, it's the same thing with equivalence. It's the same thing with equivalence relationships and negation relationships.
Exactly.
You have to, in order to assemble all the arguments that you wish to present, for example, you would need to traverse the whole graph and pick up the pro and con arguments throughout.
No, it is different here. It's like to know whether the claim is a claim or an argument, you have to traverse. It's like the cases for traversal become much more frequent. Like there's a basic missing about information about this is this claim an argument, which I can only know through traversal. So it certainly argues against class identity.
The same goes to know whether or not it's equivalent. You need to traverse it. I mean, for me, it sounds the same, to be honest. I mean, but it's that reason, though, that traversal that for me complicates using the model, which is why I opt for the other one.
Yeah. I must say, it makes me less comfortable with this model for sure. Like,
well, here's a question. Here's a good test for this. Is well, we've already discussed this too. I think it's awkward, but there are moments, which was, can an argument be a premise? And the answer is usually no, but in unusual circumstances, yes. So the question then is, is that a problem if we don't know? Yes, it can be a premise theoretically, but anyway, yes, we agree it can be a premise. It's just not a common case. But so that would have complicated the problem of claim versus argument. In other words, you need to know the type of something, and by making something equivalent to something of another type, you're implicitly casting it to the other type in a weird way. It's now usable in all the situations that the subtype is usable
But you could also say equivalence does not belong to the whole object, but just to the certain trait, the claim trait.
Yeah, but then,
well, then you'd have to extract the claim trait into its own.
Yeah, exactly. But that's something worthwhile exploring. But then that's a different model than the one we have there right now.
Right, but that's what I'm trying to do here is explore all those aspects so we can see if the model needs to change or is appropriate.
I'm really puzzled when you say, when I said, oh, it's a problem that you have to traverse to know what the claim is, whether it's an argument or not. And you said, oh, but it's the same as traversal in other cases. But it seems the other cases are cases where we're actually doing an operation, and maybe I'm missing something there.
But you're always doing an operation. Why are you traversing to check whether it's an argument?
Right.
Because
you don't care, right? If you just want to render the sentence, you don't care and you just display it. But I mean, you might be traversing it if you're trying to show the premise and the conclusion individually. That could be a reason.
But to know whether it's an argument or not, seems to be, in OO, I expect to be able to know the class of my instance as atomic operation.
It's two instances. It's not one instance. It's two.
I know.
Right. So, but so the point here is
of another instance, and it's got the behavior of another class, and it's oh yeah, I can derive the behavior of the other class by traversing.
It comes down to a model being useful. What is the benefit of having them be two separate instances? That's a question you need to be asking yourself. Like, what can we do extra by having them as separate instances?
The answer to the question is there something that refers to or uses argument, but not claim, right? In this model, nothing yet, right? But if we were to have some class that operates only on argument and not on claim, then you would need to create a mechanism where it can operate on claim as long as the claim is equivalent to an argument. Right? We don't have that situation at the moment. It may come up. If you want to access the is support, then you could imagine a situation where you're plugging the claim into a place where an argument should fit and calling is support on it, and you'd have to do some sort of traversal, right? We haven't proposed that our operation at this point.
Let me be devil's advocate here, because the way I see it, one reason to have it as two separate instances would be to model process. Because if you want to, okay, so you understand what I mean by that? But that's not what I think we should model in this model. I think that's something we need to model in a separate model. That's why I'm playing devil's advocate.
What I would say is one reason I would want in my language, symbol and thought proxy to be distinct, right? And my model is very hybrid. I have both the equivalence class, which is Stephen's claim as a thought proxy, and Tim's claim as a symbol. It's because I can sometimes have the symbol in context versus decontextualized. And I think it's sometimes important to say, this is the meaning of this.
Yeah, and these are the examples you have to list in a process here. And what I expect is that these examples will belong to a different bounded context, but we have to go through them. If you say it's sometimes important to say something, we just need to add that as examples and go through them.
There.
So here's an interesting thing: is the is equivalent to relationship. It doesn't exist in Stephen's model. We agree that Stephen's model
it models it. It's simply not.
It doesn't exist in the model. It exists in
I don't know what you mean
the representation of the model.
There's no relation. There's no arrow. There's no edge. But I mean, it is modeled by the mere fact that the sentences live in the same set. That is also modeling. It's not everything is modeled as nodes and edges. I mean,
it's implicit.
Yeah.
Okay. If we look at Marc-Antoine's approach of, or
model,
No, not model. If we're to consider this ongoing debate about it's not process, it's actual argumentation. Let's look at an argument or a claim actually that is claim A is equivalent to claim B. That is a claim, right? Which we're not. We've strayed off of the process here because we're not considering what we're supposed to be considering. But anyway, you wouldn't do that with an equivalent to relationship. You would do that with a claim. Well, maybe you would do it with an equivalent to. You would do it. You need some reference to a claim. So maybe this is the model is you say claim A is equivalent to claim B. Claim C says claim A is equivalent to claim B. But really the connection then would be through claim C.
Yes.
And not as we have it modeled here, which is claim C to, or claim A to claim B or something. Let's table that one. This was a thought exercise I was going through here. Let's put that in the list of one of the things to do soon. Yeah, so let's roll that back. I want to get back onto what we're talking about here.
Let me not get into that, but let me get into the, since you're asking, let me make it into a case. What I was arguing for here about the context, which is a distinct story than the meta, is saying this sentence, if I take it at face value, this is kind of what it means and blah, blah, blah. But used in this context, because of the context, I can interpret it differently and it's equivalent to something else. So I think we all agree that the same sentence has multiple meanings. So in the case of Stephen's model, we could have the same sentence being a positive sentence of distinct claims, right? And in the case of Tim's model, we would have the equivalent to would not necessarily be interpreted to be
I think we're talking about two different forms of equivalence here. I mean, if that might have to do with canonicality. When I would put two positive sentences side by side in the same claim, it is modeled as being exactly equivalent and not being maybe not equivalent under a different context. Different context to me would be different claims.
Yes, no, I think that's what I'm saying.
Agreed.
I think what I'm saying is, if we have two meanings for a sentence, you would make two different claims, would just happen to use the same sentence.
Yes, that's true.
And I think it's the same that Tim would do. There would be two claims with the same sentence. Is that right? Checking.
Two claims with the same sentence, correct.
Correct, good, checking that. And so there's no...
No, actually, let's rewind back. Is that true? By Tim, you mean the tim.svg, right?
Yeah.
So... yeah, but because Tim, you also said that you implement... Yeah, but Tim has also implemented the left one in graph before, I heard in previous meetings.
That's true. No, I understand what he means. He means tim.svg, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You would have two instances with the exact same sentence in there.
Correct.
Yes,
isn't
because
it weird?
there's no many-to-many relationship between claim and sentence. That's why you need to.
Yeah, but what would be the purpose? What would be the purpose of that?
I mean, my understanding is that's how it would occur naturally in any crowdsourced user interface. Then you might want to do cleanup, right? If they are confirmed to be identical, in other words, the same canonical claim, well, we haven't gotten to how that should be modeled, right?
But it depends on what a claim is, because if the sentence is the exact same sentence, why would it be a different
The
claim?
sentence is not the claim. The sentence is a representation of the claim. So
the claim is a symbol meaning unit, is a symbol meaning pair.
But
Something
right
like
now,
that, yeah.
in the current model, there's nothing else for it to disambiguate it from another claim. So
We haven't gotten to those use cases.
yeah,
It's
which is why I'm asking
equivalence
in the
class.
current, which is why I'm asking the current model, what would be the use of representing the same exact sentence as two separate claims?
What would be the use of
You
not
can't-
representing as two separate claims?
You
Yeah.
We don't
tell
have
them
use
apart.
cases that.
You can't tell them apart. You don't know which one is which.
Well, you're making up a reason that isn't in our use cases here.
No, but
I mean, I could tell you reasons for it. I could totally tell you reasons, but they're outside the scope of what we're doing right now, right?
Tim, I agree with you in general, but I think Stephen has a valid point. Maybe we should add an ID to the claim, because otherwise we have nothing to distinguish the claims.
Yeah, we don't have a primary key, but you can have a database table with duplicate rows as well, right?
That is.
We just have no way to reference them. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, the reference is implicit.
Yes, it would be nice to
in
be
an
able to
instant
reference
diagram. In an instance diagram, you do not need an ID. By representing two separate instances, it's already
that's not even my
explicit that they're
point.
separate.
That's not even my point, because even ID doesn't carry meaning. By all means, the sentence is the ID here. If you would add an ID, it's only for easier equality checking or whatever. I mean, that the claim as is in the current model does not carry meaning beyond the sentence.
Well, look, your model implies kind of a curator deus ex machina, or a curator God that instantly cleans up these problems, right?
But it's an equality check.
Process, yes.
Huh?
No, it's not difficult. You can simply say, like, if you create a new claim and a claim with the exact same sentence exists, you just use that claim. I'm asking, what's the benefit of not doing that?
Your model makes it wholly impossible to have the sentence Paris is nice and have one mean Paris, France, and the other mean Paris, the Greek figure, and another mean Paris, Texas.
Yeah,
right?
But now you're talking about use cases that are not covered in the current list.
Okay,
but talking about entity identification.
That's what I'm saying, is you're worrying about things that aren't to worry about yet, right?
No, but one second. Stephen, you admitted earlier that you could have multiple claims with the same positive sentence, didn't you? So it's the same. It's the same as Stephen.
I know it's the same. I'm just observing that it would be weird in tim.svg to have two claims, and probably something similar happens in the other one. But it would be weird to have two claim instances with the exact same phrase. It implies, if you want, that it implies. I don't see why
it's weirder in his case than in your case. What differentiates them is their equivalent.
I'm not arguing for one or the other, Marc-Antoine. I'm just saying it's weird in isolation.
Fair, but okay, but
I mean, your model says nothing about
the same phenomenon.
Yeah, your model says nothing about having to. I mean, what you've added is a feature on top of the claim that's not in the model, which is that sentences are unique, right? You don't have that represented in your model. You are saying sentences are unique and belong to exactly one claim. So if that's what you want in your model.
He said the reverse earlier. He said it and he said the reverse. So
I think just take it as a comment indeed that I feel like something along those lines is missing in our examples. And if that's not the case,
okay.
then
yeah, let's add an example
that
to handle.
Missing.
Okay, add that as another case for us to.
Yeah, you do it. It's a Google Doc. You edit.
Yeah.
So something I'd like to point out while we're on this is, for me, and maybe I must make that a use case, going from meaning to all the sentences we've all agreed is an important use case, but the reverse is very important, is saying, and I don't know if that's a use case as such, because it's obvious to me, going from a sentence to all the meanings and being able to say, by the way, when you say this, it could mean that or that or that or that, and which one do you think you mean? It's like the disambiguation page in Wikipedia.
Exactly.
I don't know if you think that is captured in the use cases, or if I need to write something, but for me, it's obviously a use case.
Yeah, it is a use case. It can't be expressed in the language of argumentation. So I don't know if we want to consider that another domain or what, but it's you would need to say that disambiguation is added to this claim, or this claim
it's a
is
bit of a process
disambiguated,
thing,
or
but it's also
it's a
use case
process
of
thing.
but it's also something I want the model to allow, to be able to say,
Yes,
here's a
I
sentence,
agree.
give me the many meanings, and so I
Yeah,
can.
I mean, if I think we haven't quite exhausted the plain, no disambiguation, no process, no anything examples, but when we run out of examples, then I would like the next step to be disambiguation.
Agreed. And I think this current proposed one is actually done, because I think
it's not done. Like I said, I think the models support it, but I think it's not done because there's at least one other aspect I would like to consider, which is what this implies about truth and relevance. I know we don't have that in the model at this point, and maybe it's a scoring thing, but I would like to temporarily pause here to reflect on it, which is, with a claim, I guess I'm going to try to summarize a couple things here before I open it up, which is, with a claim, we know we have this concept of a claim being true or false, right? And we know that true and false aren't really about truth. We know it's about acceptance or agreement or belief, or that sort of thing. And we know there's this discussion or debate up in the air about whether or not it should be an all or nothing thing. If it's belief, either you believe it or you don't, or maybe you can partially believe it, or maybe you think it's probably true or it could partially be true. So all these things kind of mix into how we're going to handle scoring. But at any rate, yeah, or it depends, right? And that, or not enough information, or that sort of thing. At that, and we know that it gets a little interesting or strange when you talk about argument or support as being a claim. There's a true false there, but I think there's more of an acceptance of gradations of that being necessary, which is that yes, this argument supports its conclusion or not, right? So that's, is it I always forget these words. Is it effective as an argument? Which is it? It's not sound, it's the opposite. Is it a valid argument? Yeah, so validity is essentially what we might consider to be true or false, right? The soundness is the true or false of its premise, right? Now, effectiveness, I think we agree, is there's some sort of sliding scale there, right? So my question is,
I still would like to see concrete examples. I mean, I can imagine it might make sense, but
well, the table we have it, our example right here. The table is brown. The table is made of wood because it is brown. No, we don't have the effectiveness, but we can discuss the effectiveness of this specific example, which is how effective. Let's say the table. Let's say that the table is brown. Let's say that's 100% true. We all agree the table is brown, right?
And how well does it?
How well does the table is brown support that the table is wood?
Right.
We can. I think we can agree.
Yeah, but effectiveness implies
a
scoring which is non-binary, basically.
Exactly. That's the point I'm getting at, which is compare that. We can say, that's not a very good argument, right? It does support it. It does support that the table somehow it supports that the table is wood.
Yeah, assuming implicitly that
assuming it's not painted. So yeah, right. Now, and that's a good point too. Let's take the standalone claim. The table is wood because it's brown. The standalone claim. I know you would break that up. And that is one way of dealing with this problem. But let's say you don't get there in time to break it up and people are already debating it, right? What you're going to have is a claim that is not an argument with arguments in support or against. And are they leading towards this is true or isn't true? How does that all play out into
Well, it would be
the
about
modeling and
this-
people's understanding of the argumentation. All, you know, what are all the ramifications of that?
Well, the ramifications would be, I think, that some of these supporting and opposing arguments will actually, if you do formalize it as an argument, will become, some of those will become supporting and opposing arguments to the argument, and others will become supporting and opposing arguments to the premise.
I agree with that.
Yep.
I think there's,
you're arguing when you're arguing in an argument, whether it's been formalized as such or not, you're arguing in its soundness mostly, and sometimes on the premise indeed. So that's something else, but often on the soundness. But whether it's formalized or not.
But the biggest problem here actually has to do, and it's really nice we started the discussion here, Marc-Antoine, with your rheme and teams. The biggest discussion is if you have non-atomic claims, such as something that uses because, you're targeting a subset usually of that claim. If you allow non-atomic things to be added in the system, some people will be arguing against the support for it, the because for it. Other people will be arguing against the premise. Other people will, so you no longer, it becomes ambiguous which thing you're arguing against.
Oh, and you have to be explicit. I agree totally. Like arguing, that's why, I mean, that's always been a prime use case for me of this whole decomposition, is knowing which one of these it is.
Yeah, and that is a really strong use case to argue that rhemes and teams need to be formalized. And the way I did it now in my system is simply by not allowing it. So any conclusion is a team, correct me if I'm wrong, is a
rheme.
Yeah, there's no mix. There's no opportunity to argue against one or the other, basically. I think, except for definitions. Okay, no, discard that.
Yeah, please rephrase, because that doesn't sound right.
But like, for example, I don't allow compositions. So it's the same logic with compositions, A and B as a claim, right? Not two, but you can start adding opposing arguments for A, opposing arguments for B. And if you actually do incremental formalization and you model it as one claim A and another claim B, you can start adding the relevant supporting and opposing arguments to the A and B as opposed to A. Okay. Do you know what I mean? Or do you, yeah, okay. So it's a similar use case. And then
yeah, I see the problem of allowing arguing against the composite when actually an argument against one of the components would be clearer.
Yes.
But on the other hand, sometimes you're arguing against the composite separately, right? Maybe you allow that A influences C, B influences C, but also A and B has a synergistic effect or not, and you're arguing for or against the synergistic effect of A and B, which is a distinct case. And I would certainly allow that as a distinct case, but I would do a kind of so-called linear decomposition saying, are you arguing against A, B, or the combination, or the synergy?
So what do we do?
What?
What do we do?
A linear decomposition.
No, but in terms of the current, because Timothy brought this up.
What Timothy's saying, well, I mean, it's all the question of progressive formalization, right? I mean, do we allow, and I think we should, an imprecise argument that is an argument against, for example, an argument not decomposed as a claim, or a claim not decomposed into theme and rheme, or just asserted as a composite predicate. And I would say yes, and then, well, actually have a kind of replacement mechanism when we say, you know, this is not as precise as this, and is this exactly what you mean, and can we check that, but propose a refinement of an imprecise argument by a more precise one, and have the notion of refinement explicit in the system. Well, of course, that's process.
Yeah, I think this does imply a future structure, like you said, of theme and rheme or something, which would be, you know, how can we automatically detect that something needs to be refactored or disallowed? Essentially, what I'm seeing our models as the ideal structure of an argument. You know, given non-unmessy humans putting it in according to the way we like to see it modeled. I have to pay for something real quick. But you know, the question is, are there then models that would help us support that, like theme and rheme as part of the claim structure?
Yes, and I think so, absolutely.
After the discussion on last Friday, I was thinking a lot about the mutual exclusion thing and negation, because if we use opposition, if we say opposition is the same as supporting the negation, but if negation is a special case of mutual exclusion, how do we deal with the whole thing?
But that's a Friday talk.
Yeah,
exactly. I'm just like, that's something I'm thinking about.
Yeah,
that does suggest
Friday.
That does suggest new examples to put on our list, which is, you know, we haven't tackled any of these harder argument structures like a mutually exclusive.
I would even say it has less priority than the stuff we're digging up right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Just saying.
I think, yeah.
I think mutually exclusive, like if we're talking about domains here, right? Mutually exclusive claims, I think, is squarely in the domain we're focusing on, even before definitions.
Maybe, yeah.
So those are some examples we should dig up before we move on to some other things, because you want to be able to say that, you know, and parameterized as well. You know, we may require definitions or some structure like that in order to do parameterization, or in order to automatically detect mutual exclusivity, but you can definitely say that you have three claims, you know, I did it, no, he did it, no, she did it, are three different mutually exclusive claims, right? So we should try to.
You all did it together, and didn't you read the
exactly possibly mutually exclusive? Exactly, you know, and when you know that something is can only be done by one person, you know, who pushed the button?
Yeah.
And so, as a Murder on the Orient Express, is it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Exactly.
More. I still think the mutual exclusion in a way can be modeled. I mean, all these things can be modeled one in terms of another. And in this case, I think that between negation and intersection, we have a lot. Like basically it's saying, when I say they're mutual exclusion, I'm just saying that the intersection is nil. Or I could say that one case is in the negation of the other and vice versa. If I'm just using negation as, if I use negation and containment versus
you're implying a lot more. You're also implying entities and posits and values. And I mean, to make that the intersections work, you need to pull in so much luggage, which you do not have to do with simply modeling mutual exclusion. And remember that a model only has to be useful. So if we want to model mutual exclusion, and that's a common use case, we maybe don't have to start modeling everything else just yet. That could be an incremental formalization of something different, or yet an entirely different model.
Yeah, true. These are things I intend to bring, but fair enough.
I understand them even. It's more that.
But I yeah. Fair. But let's. Yeah.
Let's go to the disambiguation thing again, if you have time elsewhere at the hour.
I do.
Tim, do you have a hard stop?
Not today. I don't think so. No,
okay.
I don't have.
I'd say we do 15 minutes more, else it's too long.
I think time boxing is a good idea.
But I would say half an hour.
All right. Did we finish? Do we want to mark this as done, or do we want to actually try to propose some sort of model structure for?
Let's
disallowing the because structure, essentially.
I think the because structure, maybe we tackled disambiguation before. Wasn't that something we said? Because it would change the model fundamentally and maybe allow.
It might be something we revisit. Yeah. It might be something we can revisit. It'll come out in maybe the theme and rheme or something similar.
I would try to formulate some type of example that highlights the problem that we're seeing and why we're struggling with just setting this to done.
Well,
so here's the reason, right, that I see, or the problem I see, which is somebody creates this sentence as a claim in the system, and people start accumulating arguments. And what you're going to get are arguments that are obviously pointing at different aspects of the sentence, meaning the table is wood because the table is wood because it's brown, right? So you'll get arguments that are trying to refute the table is wood. No, it's made of plastic. And you'll get arguments that are trying to refute the table is brown. No, it's blue. And you'll get arguments that are trying to refute because it's brown.
Yeah,
right?
we understand that
that
the problem
doesn't prove
is
anything.
The
Right.
question is, why is that a problem? Because we understand that's the issue, but the question now is, what is the problem and why can't you model it like that? You have one claim indeed that says that, and then you have, it seems like that the problem is that,
Well, it's non-canonical for one thing.
You have one claiming equivalent to an argument, and the supporting and opposing arguments for and against are different, I think, is the main problem with the model here, right? Because you're saying they're equivalent, but at the same time, the supporting and opposing arguments that are added to the because form, these have all the problems you're outlining right now. If you do formalize it as an argument, then we're saying, oh, but it's an argument. So if you adding support and opposing, it should be about the because and not about something else or whatever.
Exactly. And you also have the problem of non-canonicality, because if somebody later on just says the table's made of wood elsewhere, it's a separate sentence, but you've accumulated all the arguments in this other place, and to do curation, right?
So
Yes.
does this mean this is a process thing, or does it mean that there's something we need to change in the model? But what I'm proposing is we should try to write this up as a use case, or decide that this is outside of scope and is process.
What I'm saying is, the notion that things have to be perfect on data entry is the one that strikes me as absurd.
Nobody makes it. It can be bad on data entry, and then you can remove it.
And this is exactly the case.
What is a
here.
snapshot? What is a snapshot?
When Tim is saying this is not canonical, I agree totally. It's not canonical yet. It's an intermediate step, and we will make changes to make it more canonical.
Exactly, that's a snapshot. So my question is, if we encounter this, we have a claim that uses because there's no argument just yet. Yeah, okay, sorry for interrupting you, but that is the point. That is the question.
That is the question. So the question is the model able to express those snapshots and those intermediate steps? And every time I try to bring this on, it's like, oh, that's process. Yes, it is. But I mean, everything, nothing is going to be perfect at the get-go, which means we have to be able to model imperfect, non-canonical.
Okay. But we can.
It's more clear to me now. Step one here is the perfect data entry step. It's like, just can we properly model these arguments, this debate, right? And step two, which means is equivalent to, is outside the scope of step one. Equivalence is not part of step one, because we're assuming perfect data entry. Once we've got perfect data entry, then we take step two, which is, well, okay, now how do we fix the problem of imperfect data entry? And what are the structures required for that? You know, in that sense, Stephen's model is better because it's better because it doesn't struggle or even acknowledge the problem of equivalence, right? You don't have that. You do have negation. Negation exists.
Equivalence is.
I don't want to hear it's modeled. We know it doesn't exist. It doesn't have to be modeled. Whether it's modeled or not, it doesn't have to be modeled, because we're not going to deal anymore with equivalence in step one. All right. Go ahead and object.
I don't think I get it then.
I think it's an interesting distinction. I think it makes sense because this is like even more core than we were already were.
Correct.
And then as a second step is the how do we model imperfect argumentation, like data entry argumentation. And then later on, it's the whole curation part. Like we put one step in between, like we just prioritize differently, which I
still think definitions are going to be, that means definitions are going to come before is equivalent to.
But I disagree.
And my objection is you want to model separately something that will never happen.
No,
it's
perfect
not about
data entry will
No.
never happen. It's an asymptote. It's an asymptote.
It's not about
No,
modeling.
it will happen. It will happen in the use case. Wait,
At infinite
no,
time.
let me disagree. It will happen in the use case of a single person using this to model and organize a debate.
Not even. We make mistakes and we argue with ourselves all the time and we change our mind.
No disagree here, Market One. The thing is like, what do we focus on first? That's the question. Not like, is it in the argument model?
In my opinion, the question is, what is a snapshot? And I don't think I can explain better than I have so far. I think the main discussion right now is not so much about the models, it's about what is a valid snapshot. What is if you draw an instance diagram and you have equivalence relations and supporting and opposing, and like, is this valid data or not in the current model? And in the team.svg, it's much easier, as I have highlighted many times before, to have invalid data because you can draw incorrect equivalence relations, etc. And indeed, in Steven.svg, you do not have that. But you can just as well, as we said many times before, have an instance diagram of team.svg that does not include these mistakes, but it's more about agreeing what are correct relations in between different instances, etc. That is a discussion. Like, can you have a claim with the because sentence being equivalent to an argument that has a premise and a conclusion with different supporting and opposing arguments to those? That is a question, yes or no? I would say no, because they're not equivalent. And that's what I model in Steven.svg. I disallow that entirely. But it doesn't rule out the option of team.svg. You can say, oh, this needs to be resolved. We need to create a snapshot where this incongruency in the model is not there, it's correct data. And they do share the same supporting and opposing arguments. And how to do that, that is process. That's what I call process.
But and my problem is we need to have a model that allows the snapshot, the imperfection to exist, because it will exist and it has to be modeled and resolved.
Which specific imperfection? Because nothing in team.svg disallows creating a claim with A because B, where you add supporting and opposing claims to. I mean, that's an imperfection we agreed just now, because it's unclear or it's less formalized. It's unclear, like in support of what these are. So an imperfection is modeled at that state of the snapshot. So to me, it allows modeling that. What
in Tim's model, yes. There's no, but in your model, I cannot speak about the equivalence relation and problematize it.
Yeah, but that's the process. That's the whole point. So if you indeed want to say, I don't think these two sentences are equivalent, then we need to indeed add a claim A, and that's when Timothy says you need to be able to refer to other claims. You need to be able to make a claim that says that claim is not equivalent to that other claim, or that phrase in that sentence, etc.
To maybe resolve the whole thing, I think Marc-Antoine, we're not disagreeing. What Marc-Antoine says, you will never have perfect data entry, which I think is correct.
That is correct.
And but the question here is right now, is perfect data entry a subset of imperfect data entry models?
But they're the same. The question is more, how do you go from imperfect to perfect? Do you model the change, or is imperfect a snapshot and is perfect a snapshot? where do you store the translation from one to the other? What I'm saying is we need one model that just stores a snapshot, which is a current state. And in order to change that model, which I call a meta model, you might indeed want to have arguments about the other model, which then need to be resolved, which results in actual changes being modeled differently.
That's a valid argument, Stephen. I hear what you're saying. But what I'm saying is you have to have the core model, and I agree that there is a process model which is distinct, but you have to have the core model rich enough that the imperfect snapshot can be stored. And this is why.
But can you give me one example of an imperfect snapshot?
I just want to say, so I think I can resolve this whole issue, which is actually not an issue. I think Marc-Antoine is correct. We need to store this imperfect data entry. And my question is only, is the model of perfect data entry a subset of the model of imperfect data entry?
Yeah, which I doubt so far.
You doubt it.
It's a valid question. It's a valid question, and that's an empirical. But
because if it is,
I think it is.
Then, yeah. I think that's the thing we're disagreeing on right now. Yeah. Because Tim thinks it is, and that's why he says, okay, we can start with the subset first. And
I think we just proved it isn't a subset.
Yeah.
With the previous examples, with the because and the supporting and opposing arguments, it's not a subset, right? If the supporting and opposing arguments to the because phrase need to be moved, but how is that a subset?
Okay, wait. Here's the thing. It's not a subset. I agree. The adding the next domain or the next set of features may change the model. I agree with that. So it may not be a subset in the sense that the model that comes out when we finish step one may not be included in the model that we come out of when we finish step two. We may not see the same structures. That's the way models evolve. I think everything that is supported in step one must also be supported in step two, which means that it's more like a subset of requirements. And we should be organizing them in that way.
And what I'm saying is a lot of the imperfections that you think of as being outside of the core subset, they can be problematized in argument, and you say, oh, that's process. No, it's what the substance of the argument is. And hence no, I'm talking to Stephen here, not to you.
Yeah.
But we had this discussion so many times before, I don't even want to have it anymore. I mean, it's a whole, you can use argument mapping to model process. We don't disagree there.
And right now, it's just
but that's
not
what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there's a point where it belongs in process, but there's a point where it belongs in argument and in the core model. They're both two facets of the same phenomenon.
The argument is about abstraction leaks, right? That's what it's about, is in order to support the meta debate, does that require leaking all that information into the first domain? That's the question.
And I'm saying yes, because they are not just process. They also, everything in process also belongs in argument structure. There's nothing that belongs only in process.
Completely agreed.
And there's nothing that belongs only in core argument structure and that cannot become process.
Yeah.
Conversely,
I disagree. I disagree. And this is going to maybe get, I disagree, and I may eat my words on this. But the reason I disagree is that the process, at least our goal was that the process should be variable. I would be happy if the canonical debate only had one process, right?
Yeah,
but you know, as the lab, as a collective here, we're wanting to experiment with different types of processes, different types of curation, right? And in that case, we need a model that can support multiple processes. The question is then, if if there's one process we definitely want to support that requires leaking abstraction into the core model, how do we deal with it? But I don't think it helps much to debate about it right now until we get to the actual problem and come up with a solution.
Another question, Well, Marc-Antoine, if you want to say.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'm wondering if it's easier to agree on the model of perfect data entry, or can we even agree on the model of imperfect data entry when we don't even agree on the model of perfect data entry? Like it's an agreement thing between us.
I don't think we're ready to agree on imperfect because, like Marc-Antoine said, it involves specifying a process.
And I want to hear Marc-Antoine's opinion here.
Yeah, I don't believe in that the perfect data entry can be delimited.
Exactly, I agree with that. I don't think even that's a point of disagreement. I think the point of disagreement is more like to which degree do you want to support disagreement on what is modeled in the model, and that's what I'm arguing. You need to delineate that, otherwise your model is not effective anymore. The whole reason we are creating a model is because that model supports use cases such as I want to show all supporting and opposing arguments in all the equivalent arguments. If you now in your model allow to model disagreement on that equivalence, all of a sudden you can.
Sorry, I'm sensing a misunderstanding here. I was talking about disagreement between us, not about something in the model.
Yeah, but
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But this is the disagreement.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
disagreement
The
between us.
disagreement.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is the question is, are meta, for me, meta arguments are part and parcel of what an argument is. You cannot separate meta arguments from arguments. And arguments without meta arguments are not a useful subdomain for me. And for Stephen, arguments without meta arguments are not only useful, but the only useful, like arguments with meta arguments are not a useful domain. Let's put it this way.
Arguments without meta arguments are the first use case that we can support. That's like one person saying, this is my argument map to make my point. And then there might be another person coming up with their argument map. And to make that canonical, you need to converge and start agreeing and disagreeing on what is being modeled. That's the meta model.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is, meta arguments, like whenever you have more than one person at one single instant in time, and I just want to answer to the one person thing, because me tomorrow is not the same person, or me yesterday is not the same person. Meta arguments creep in. They always do.
Well, they never did. They never did in my own personal modeling efforts. What I do is I resolve them. My process of curation is literally creating a new snapshot that's different from the previous one. And that's how I feel most argument mappers do it. We can also ask Jamie. I mean, you're not going to have an argument with yourself. Hey, are these two really equivalent? I've never had the use case. And I understand the use case may exist if you're doing this in a community.
I understand the point that, yeah, if you're doing it with yourself, basically you let yourself today win all the time.
Exactly.
Which is easy. Yeah, it's good enough. And in a community, it's not good enough.
That's
but
the
in
process
a
at that point.
in a canonical process, it's a community process. And that's what I'm saying. The single person intuitions are not that useful.
Yeah, but we haven't defined the community process.
Exactly.
And that is why I'm saying let's start with something easier, which is a foundation we all know has to be there before we get into the, how do you claim that two things are identical, and how do you debate that, and how do you decide to put them together and decide to merge them, or are you creating a new branch, or what? All these are tough questions later on. But
I'm not a disembodied. Was it Hume who supposed, what about an intelligence who had no external perception, no senses, and was pure intelligence without perception? I'm not a pure intelligence. Most of my debates are about opinions I've encountered from someone else. Even if I'm doing my own positions, it's in an argument with others, even if they're not there, even if they're not answering.
But we capture pros and cons.
Exactly.
Yeah. What happens though is you may misunderstand what they meant, but you put it down according to what you meant, and there is no argumentation there about, you know, you put their argument in your words, and
Yes.
it might be right or wrong, but there's no debate over that.
No, but there's debate about did Kant mean the same thing by beautiful than Plato? I'm thinking about that, you know?
Yeah, but you can model that. The question is how, but you can model that. I mean, then you can just say, oh, well, that claim doesn't support the other one because that's not necessarily what Kant meant by beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. This is a meta argument.
No, well, that it wouldn't be a meta argument. If that is the argument, that's what we could model in the argument model right now. We can model that with the current model. We can draw up an instance diagram if you want.
And you'll find out that many of those are meta arguments, actually. Like what I'm saying is, if I'm saying,
but then you're misunderstanding what we're implying by meta arguments, because meta arguments, what at least what I mean, are arguments to argue to change what is currently modeled.
Correct.
It's like it's to argue to say that an opposing claim should be removed. It's to argue to say that two sentences are not equivalent. It's to argue to say that something is not a premise in an argument. Perhaps that would be silly, but
yeah, but okay. Now, that's an interesting conversation. I see what you're saying. I'm saying a lot of those have another face, and when I say it's two-faced, I agree that there's something distinct, which is the process. I've always agreed with that. But I'm saying each of those have a mirror image, which is a pure argument, core argument thing, which is not necessarily identical, but which is saying, like, this premise is not relevant to that argument, which is also a meta argument. I'm arguing about that argument. It's opposing the form of that argument by saying this premise does not belong there. It's a non sequitur, blah, blah, blah. I'm saying every process thing has a core meta argument.
Okay.
Materialization, which is
okay.
distinct.
You're getting into an interesting point that I think we should tackle in this structure, which is the multi-premise, right? I would say it's a step two, though. It's a process thing to say that premise is irrelevant. It might be inherent in our diagram, in our solution, that relevance plays a part in premises. We'll have to see about that. But at any rate, there is a process part of that I don't think we should tackle right now. Part of the reason for that is there are a lot of argument structures that we haven't designed yet, that aren't in here in the basic model, not considering process, right?
By the way, I think the multi-premise aspect was purely incidental to the argument I was making. The argument I was
no, I understand, but
yeah,
you also talked about it was yeah. I got it.
Okay, and it's true, there is a distinction between process and non-process. When I say there's no distinction, it's a bit of an abuse of language, but I'm saying there's nothing that belongs in the process that does not get reflected in the structure.
Right, you may reuse the same structures for the process.
Or not,
but their connection to.
But there's a meta argument aspect that belongs.
Right, their connection to the structure is weird, to the input.
That's why it's a meta argument, right?
Yeah.
No, but meta. And you're right, Stephen. There's two meanings of meta. When you said, "Oh, you're not using meta the way I am," and you made a correct point. There's a point about. I should change the structure this way as a refactoring, and that's more process. But I'm saying there's a meta, which is not quite the same meta and not as processy, which is the incarnation of that in the core, which is saying, I'm arguing that this does not belong. Like there's an argument that this does not belong. And that
but in a way, adding opposition to an argument is arguing that it doesn't belong. In a way.
Yeah. Exactly.
And we support that in the core model, not in any, we're not saying that's out of scope, right?
Right. Well, yes, correct. And I'm saying it's a lot of things that I hear, oh, that's process. They were of this kind, and they weren't. And I feel a lot of them were not being processed.
That's a valid point. And then it's through examples. I hope that might become clear. But again, to reiterate, when I say process, it's all about changing what is modeled. It's not. And then the argument, and that's why the disagreement may lie, like what should be modeled, which disagreements should be modeled, such as adding opposition to relevance, versus which disagreements are simply decided by process. That's a distinction between, for me, process and the argument model.
And let's get further in the example on that reasoning. You know, when we said this at some point in progressive formalization, we have a generic argument against the claim which has not yet been decomposed into its premise conclusion form, right? Mm-hmm. And then we discover later, we put it into premise, full argument, premise, conclusion form, and then we realize that a lot of these arguments were actually arguments against.
I think the question is, what does it mean to put into? Do you remove the previous one? Do you keep both, etc.? Yeah.
And I said there's a link between both, which is this is a refinement of, right? And the question is this refinement of materialized? And that's the question you're
in a model or retained in the process. I think that's a good way to put it. Yes.
And I'm saying there are moments where people may disagree about this is a refinement of, and an argument may hang on that, and that may be expressed, and this is not a proper refinement of, and this needs to be expressed in the core model.
Understood. So I think we need to find an example for that use case, because I think it's a super interesting one. We talked about it at great length today. So let's try to find a concrete example that expresses this to help us decide whether it belongs in the model or in process, I think.
Yeah, fair enough.
And I'd vote for that to go first on the next meeting agenda, if we can write it up.
Okay, that's my homework.
Well, we can do it together.
Okay,
cool. Maybe not today, though.
Yeah, what I suggest is I'll take a stab at it and compare notes tomorrow.
I'm not sure I can do that. But yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, me and Steven then.
Yeah.
I understand the concern. But for now, it would be one step forward if we understand what at least I've been trying to call meta-arguments. So there's still an open discussion whether or not something should be modeled.
And what I've called the meta, when I said there's always two faces to any meta-argument. I think that is progress. I don't know if everybody followed what I said.
I think I do. Like, it's two distinctions of meta. I got that.
Yeah, good.
It's a good distinction to make, and I think it led to a lot of misunderstandings in the past.
Now, where does this leave us with 42, though? Row 42.
I mean,
I think we can.
The point I was trying to make here about 42 is that I think equivalent is a next step that we're not ready to tackle. While we can see how it's supported by both models, we've already seen that.
Yeah, but there seems to be some disagreement on what a correct state of that model is. I think that's not fully resolved. So for that,
well, now we're just considering essentially perfect data entry, and so this wouldn't come up, right? You wouldn't have somebody entering the table is made of wood because it is brown, because the proper modeling of that would be the claim the table is made of wood and the table is brown, and table is brown supports the table is made of wood.
So you're doing what I'm doing, and you disallow it basically. It's an incorrect modeling.
For now.
Okay.
For now, until we talk about bad data entry, right?
But that means that 42 is invalid, basically.
42 means that it's going over to postponed.
Postponed.
Essentially.
Yeah. Are we also dropping the equivalence edge then in the model in the purpose of postponing everything?
Yes, yes. Because for one thing, I think it's modeled incorrectly with the way it would actually come up with meta arguments. And I think we should model meta arguments. And then you'll see something like an equivalent. But it won't be. Instead, it'll be a claim refers to other claim type of structure.
But we already have equivalence.
But we should get rid of it. We should get rid of it because it's a process thing. That's really what's happening. We all agreed that it should be supported, right? But we didn't really go into what it means to be equivalent or anything like that.
No, I think, Tim, there's a lot of things that are completed that we'll have to revisit if you get rid of equivalence.
Yes.
I agree that there's a component aspect, a process aspect to equivalence, just as there's a process aspect to everything in the core model. But that doesn't mean that we cannot at times take some of those equivalences as established and accepted in few, and work on it. And
when do you have in step one, when do you have equivalence? When do you have a use for equivalence? I mean, it's been implemented in Stephen's model as not existing anyway, as having multiple sentences, essentially, right?
Yeah, but in your model, I had the CO2 example, right? CO2 and carbon dioxide here.
Right.
In your model.
So that's in there. Yeah, two sentences that mean the same thing.
That's in Stephen's model, but if you remove equivalence from your model, it's not handled anymore.
Correct.
I think that the difference between sentences are interpreted as the same claim and claim equivalence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because that's on the sentence level, and I would accept for my model removing the equivalence relationship and replacing it with multiple sentences,
which makes it equivalent to Stephen's model.
Probably, if you want to make it work.
Yes.
So what you're basically saying is that we should move forward with the current process, but switch to the what I would call simpler model.
Yeah, well, I don't know if we should keep the simpler model necessarily. What's still important in the tim.svg model, what's important there is the negation relationship. I still think there should be a negation relationship. Right.
No, but if you remove the equivalence relationship from tim.svg, we'd have to go through it. But the question is whether everything else still works. If I'm not certain you can simply replace it with multiple sentences. If we can, we should do it. But problems might arise.
We can go over that really quick. My intuition is yes, we could, because in part anything that anything that might I think is probably process type stuff that I'm delaying. But the CO2 carbon dioxide case is a very important one, and I already modified it to say that it should be sentences.
So we basically have to go through the use cases that cover equivalence and put them back to declared. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I guess so.
I thought, sorry, I'm trying to understand, Tim, how is your new model different from Stephen's? Is it the fact that the negation is separate?
Yeah.
Yeah, the negation is a separate instance.
Okay, so I think the next job then is to redraw your model to use something like something like make a new model, make a tim2.svg based on Stephen.svg, but negation as an explicit thing. That takes seconds, and I'll do it.
I'm looking at it right now, and I think Timothy is right. Probably you can remove equivalent to and just model negation as two separate instances, and that works because we have the Boolean is supporting argument, right?
Yeah.
So the main difference is.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. By the way, it's something it's closer to my model.
I'd have to walk through it. I'll try to it when I find time, but I think it should work. Yeah, I think I like it.
So what we have is take the negation from Tim. Negation. And this is not a star anymore, though.
Negation is a 1-1 then.
Yeah. Anti-reflexive, symmetric, anti-transitive. Yes.
It cannot be transitive anymore if it's 1-1.
It's it was
Yeah, but it cannot
yeah,
even
good
be
point.
tran-
Good point.
yeah.
Transitivity becomes moot.
Yeah, it's only anti-reflexive and symmetric. Yes.
Yes, I agree. So we are now with something like this, and it's a bit hard to read, so we'll have to.
We'll have to add more things to the model later. Yeah. We're already
So
at
I don't need
130.
positive sentences
But
anymore.
then I would still say that this one is.
And then you can remove the flags in the support edge.
That doesn't mean that this use case is completed still.
The CO2 one is completed, yes. There's
but
other things that mentioned equivalent that aren't.
Right.
Um,
So let me check that in.
Anything that somebody declares something is equivalent to another is essentially what's not supported. But
Okay, so we have that, and we'll work further on that.
No, but we still support the equivalence, right? Because you have multiple sentences now in tim2.svg as well.
Yeah.
But it's not claim equivalent. It's sentence are interpreted as this being the same claim.
Yeah, so if you interpret all these use cases like that, then all of these are still supported.
Yes.
Even the one that we had this whole lengthy meeting about.
yeah. It's just what's not included is any declaration of things being the same. Because it presupposes that they were separate things until that declaration.
By the way, I'm thinking instead of making that negation into a link, I'll make it into.
I mean, if it's a one-to-one, you essentially have it's the same as the other model.
There is the problem that no, that's not a problem. Yeah, so I can remove this horrible notation.
But it has to be optional.
Fair enough.
Optional?
In the sense of the absence of the negation edge.
We can.
It's required.
We can auto-generate it, and the strings are optional in the other one, in the auto-generated one.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, I can live with that. Yeah.
All right, we're already at 135 now.
True.
I guess we should go. Yeah.
I think we should continue tomorrow again with the same process. I really want to make progress. I think we
As you wish.
are making progress tomorrow. In general, right now we're making progress. So
strong promises, but I'll try to be there. If not, I'll check the recording. See you.
All right.
Okay.
See you tomorrow.
See you.